Thank you all for being here for this Brownfield Community Engagement Meeting number 3. I think we met the last time back in January, I believe, kind of before some of the real panic and all that. So a lot has happened, and a lot probably has stood still for a while in all our lives, but really thankful to kind of get things a little bit. So I'm going to right in and just talk about the briefly. And what we're going to cover tonight. This is not going to be altogether different from some of the previous meetings. So if you've been on past meetings and you've seen the presentation, some of it is definitely going to be similar. We'll give you some updates, but also keeping in mind that we've got new folks coming into this as well and learning about it. So just excited to have the group that we do and whoever else joins in. But feel free as we go through to type questions in the chat if you have any, or feel free as well along the way. You're going to be hearing from me as well as my colleagues, Daoud Shabaka and Keith Gibran from Cardno. Feel free to just chime in and interrupt at the time, and we can help with that and just be more of a discussion. So don't feel afraid to do that. All right. So we're going to go through a few introductions just of some of the key staff here. We're not going to go around the room for the sake of time here, but feel free if you would like to be on a mailing list. You can put your name privately in the chat or to the entire chat box. Put your email, contact information if you would like, and we will make sure you get on the list for all future events. We also have a few folks that are helping take notes virtually here as well. So. Additionally, I just do want to point out we are recording this session. So unless you have any objection to that, we're going to continue with that so that we can share it back with you later as well. All right, so introductions, we will cover the general EPA Brownfield program and then go into Savannah's Brownfield program specifically. How did Savannah kind of start with this? Where are we going with it? And what our scope on this current grant project that we have is, what we have done so far and what we still want to do. Then a little bit of information on the Georgia Brownfield program, which just to distinguish it is different from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency Brownfield program. So the state Brownfield program that he has is part of the EPA federal grant program. And then finally, and I think not least of which, I mean, this is the most important, is really community input and open discussion from all of you. So I would ask that you please feel free. Again, we want to get take advantage of this time to really get feedback from you all. Keith, if you could do me a favor, I know I see some chat items coming through. If you can just call those out as needed. Oh, am I cutting out a lot? Sorry, just
yeah, you're cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, a lot. Like we missed a whole section of what you were saying.
Aha. Okay.
It's very distorted. It's very distorted once you get into talking.
We got the most of it, but there was some details missing. But I don't think you need to repeat yourself necessarily.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try and keep a better eye on the chat, and I apologize for that.
If things really go haywire, you can always mute your computer and call in too to get your audio.
Right. Okay. Well, just to answer one of the questions, the information that we're looking for, if you would like, you can privately send a chat to me with your name, email, and phone number. If you are not currently, if you didn't get this invite through me, then we can make sure that you get on the mailing list for any future communications. So that's your name, email, and phone number, or whatever is most comfortable for you to share. Everyone still hearing me?
Yeah, you're good, Nick.
It's a little better.
Okay, excellent. All right, so then next slide here is just introductions of our project team. So again, my name is Nick Deffley. I am the Sustainability Director at the City of Savannah. And I am the city representative helping manage the Brownfield grant that we got through the Environmental Protection Agency. And I'll hand it over to Daoud Shabaka with Harambe House.
Thank you, Nick. Good evening, everyone. I'm Daoud Shabaka, Associate Director with the Harambe House, and the Harambe House has been working with the Office of Sustainability and with Cardinal on the community involvement on the Brownfield program, and I'll leave it right there. But I'll also kill my video when I'm not speaking. Want to cut down on the bandwidth as much as possible to avoid the audio issues.
Thanks, David. And yeah, that's a good idea. I think for anyone, I think it does help just based on experience. If you do cut out your video, it's a little easier, I think, for everyone from a Zoom standpoint to handle the call. All right, Keith, if you could jump in and introduce yourself, please.
Sure. I'm Keith Jebrin with Cardno. I'm a senior principal at the firm and currently managing Savannah's Brownfield project. Really excited to be here tonight. I probably met a bunch of you during one of the last two meetings, but glad that we're finally back together, and I really look forward to sharing some information. Nick, if we get some chat questions along the way during my part, feel free to break in and ask them, just to keep things very informal. But with that, if you would advance the slide to the next one. So the section that I'm going to cover right now is kind of a focus on the EPA Brownfield program itself. We'll cover the state program later, as Nick mentioned, but on the federal side, the Brownfield program is meant to address properties which are defined as brownfields. And the brownfield sites are defined as a property, the expansion, redevelopment, reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous substance, pollutants, contaminants, controlled substances, petroleum or petroleum products, or is mine-scarred land. Now, I know that's the words, kind of a little bit mumbo-jumbo, but to me, the foremost important part of that definition is the presence or potential presence. And I'm working on projects similar to this all over the country, and it very, whether it's a small town to a large city, everywhere you go, there are properties that have been sitting undeveloped, underutilized for decades sometimes. And it's because of that potential presence of environmental impact. And that's what the goal of the program is, to quantify those concerns so that you can put it in place and ultimately get past that stigma, if you will. Okay, Nick, if you go to the next slide. Beautiful. Some of the objectives of development are to return abandoned and underutilized sites to productive use, address environmental justice concerns, and obviously the goal is to do all of this work with public benefit in mind. Obviously, we want to generate tax revenues in areas where there haven't been any revenues because there are so many vacant properties. But beyond that, the goal is to really create jobs, bring businesses in, give venues for folks to set up shop, literally, and really start to revitalize areas. Some other issues are combating sprawl, addressing environmental justice issues, which Dawood will talk a little bit about, and really to recycle commercial and industrial properties that aren't needed anymore for their former use, whether it's an old textile mill or an old gas station that can be converted to a clinic, as an example. Obviously, there's this tie to sustainability, and that rings true, obvious, with the fact that Savannah's project manager is the sustainability director, Nick, and he and I have been working on this initiative for half a decade, almost, believe it or not, to get to this point to where we can leverage the federal dollars and ultimately do some good for areas of the city that are in need. And once again, perception is reality. A site doesn't have to be contaminated to be a brownfield. It could just have that stigma. And the goal is really to remove that stigma with this work. Nick, if you could go to the next one. This graphic is, I'll just touch on quickly. This shows all of the brownfield grants that EPA maintains. The one that we're going to talk about today is the assessment grant. There are also multi-purpose grants that fall under that umbrella. But assessment grants are the type of grants that the city applied for and obtained. There are also cleanup grants, loan fund grants. The state has its own grant applied for and obtained its own brownfield grant to fund the state brownfield program. And there's a couple great people online right now. Both Nikki Habrack and Adam Hanley are listening in, who are in the state's brownfield program and are benefiting from those funds. Job training grants are another one. And for smaller communities, small technical assistant grants are out there kind of for a one-off assessment or planning project. But what we really want to focus on are the grants kind of on the top side of that graphic. So, if you will, I'm advancing slides again. Beautiful. So, the city applied for and obtained a community-wide assessment grant. So, some of the funded activities that are being addressed, we've got essentially a brownfield inventory for the target area. Community outreach is key to any federally funded project, and more specifically to brownfield program. So, and that's why we're all here tonight. Phase 1 assessments, Phase 2 assessments. Phase 1 assessments really look at documented evidence of potential impacts with respect to a specific site. And Phase 2 environmental assessments actually look at collecting hard, quantifiable analytical data that says, okay, the site's contaminated with benzene at 500 parts per million. What are we going to do about it? That's the information that's gathered to allow us to make decisions on how to proceed. Other work that can be done with assessment grants are cleanup and reuse planning, which we'll talk a little about later. Okay, next. Other EPA grants that the city hopes to leverage in the future are cleanup grants. Those are site-specific. Stepping back a second, you don't have to reverse the slide, but the assessment grants, when you apply, you have a typical target area, which we have, and a couple sites that you want to evaluate. But during this community involvement piece, you're able to identify others that can be assessed either by this grant or future grants. Well, cleanup grants are site-specific. The applicant, which could be the city, a development authority, or a nonprofit, could even be a church, can apply for up to $5 to complete remedial activities, whether it's asbestos abatement, soil removal, underground storage tank removal, groundwater treatment. There's a whole slew of different types of work that fall under that umbrella. And then there are the brownfield cleanup revolving grants, which provide up to $1 million to the grantee. It could be a municipality, it could be a development authority, and that money can be used to either provide nonprofits with money to do cleanup on their sites, or it could be lent out to developers who are interested in working on, equitable development projects and so on. And at the end of the day, I think this quote is kind of handy, that the U.S. Conference of Mayors has identified the lack of cleanup funding as the #1 impediment to brownfield redevelopment. So, just recently, I'd say within the last 2 or 3 fiscal years, the cleanup grant amount went from $200,000 per site to $500,000 per site. And you can get a lot more work done with $500,000 per site. It's really a true benefit. And I know Nick and I have been talking about, leveraging that fully within the next year or so. Benefits, yeah, keep going. It's fine. Next one. I'll just focus on the right side. The program's been on for since the mid-1990s. Since its inception, there have been over 28,000 properties assessed. Over 140,000 jobs have been created associated with properties that have been assessed and cleaned up. And when you think about that, it could be, folks living in a mixed-use development that have their own home office there, or it could be, maintenance staff associated with green space. It could be any slew of different, types of jobs that have been created, both high and low paying, but the goal is always to, provide opportunity to the communities where this money's being spent. As for dollars leveraged, over $26 billion have been leveraged. I know, one example is like the Atlanta Beltline, that they've taken advantage of a number of different grants that they've either obtained individually or through the city of Atlanta, and well over $1 billion have been leveraged just on that one project. And then over 77,000 acres have been cleaned up and made ready for future use. So pretty impressive statistics. And in fact, they're a couple of years old. So I've got to update that slide. That's for another day. Anyway, next slide. Just quickly, and I don't think Sarah's online, but we recently had a change in project officer. Sarah Janovitz is project officer for this grant. She took over about 6-8 months ago, maybe not that long, but we've been getting her up to speed, and she's been a great resource for kind of helping outside the box and so on. And we're really happy to have her. Her contact information's there if anybody has a direct question for her, and that she's always a resource for folks. So next. So Savannah's Brownfield. I think Nick, you're gonna take over and hit this next group of slides, or maybe Otis. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Can you all still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, my screen went away for a second. All right. So Keith, just so you're aware, there's a question in the chat from Dr. Carol Pride at Savannah State. Do any of the sites studied so far on this project require cleanup? And I know we've got some slides on that in a minute, so I just wanted to point that out to you as we move forward, that you can, when you come back to present, you can speak to for a minute if you would. I also
Sure, we can talk about that. There's a couple. Sure.
Okay. I also just want to quickly recognize and thank Alderwoman Keisha Gibson Carter for being on the call. She has been a supporter of this project from the outset and has been in a lot of our meetings. So thank you, Alderwoman. Glad to hear.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And also former Mayor Otis Johnson is on the call, and just wanted to thank you, sir, for being on the call as well and all the work you do in the community. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so next slide. So about Savannah and what we have been doing with this project. So again, some of you have seen this slide before, but it's just giving you a perspective. The city of Savannah itself has never had an EPA Brownfield grant previously. So this was a first award for us in 2018. And we had actually, this community-wide assessment grant has been something we've been shooting for quite a while. We finally got to it, but it's highly competitive. We had applied 3 separate times prior to getting this award in 2018. And really it allows us to start looking specifically at the MLK Montgomery corridor from about Bay Street down to 52nd Street, and part of the up and coming canal district that the city is also working on. And all of that is part of a target area for a pilot grant program to assess and inventory potential brownfield properties throughout that community. A lot of the work that we did in applying for the grant, EPA requires a lot of strenuous work, partnership, collaboration. And so we spent a lot of those first few years in our application processes just building partnerships with organizations along the community, some of the organizations that are represented on this call, and neighborhood associations. And so there's been an ongoing effort to build this project, and not just this grant, but what I'll show you in a second is more of a brownfield program for helping with identifying some of these properties, cleaning them up, and redeveloping them in a way that is supportive to the community members who are there. Localized redevelopment. So just summarizing a little more of what I just said, the focus here in our Brownfield program, as we are developing it, is really to focus on recognizing racial and social equity issues and challenges that we face as we look at redevelopment of a community. There's a lot of great components on its face value of this Brownfield program, right? To say, oh yeah, we're going to clean up these sites that might be contaminated, maybe an old gas station, an old dry cleaners. It's been blighted for a long time. We could put it back into productive use. We could limit the environmental exposure to folks who are perhaps walking across it, residents who live near that property. But ultimately, what we also want to do is stay through and true to this the entire way through. This is not just let's clean up the property. It is how do we redevelop it? How do we redevelop it in a way that is guided and co-created by the residents of the communities we're working in, so that we're meeting the needs of the residents of the communities we're working on, and we're not displacing anyone. We are really spurring on local redevelopment. And so that is going to be a continuous push and driver and focus in all of the work that we do. So I spoke a little bit to the corridor itself, what we are targeting here. Again, understanding that Montgomery Street used to be Highway 17 going into South Carolina. So there's a lot of former commercial and semi-industrial properties on that. It's also, that corridor represents kind of the edge, the western edge of the historic district, which has for some time kind of historically been kind of that dividing line between kind of the historic, more affluent, and oftentimes white, and then lower income, oftentimes African-American communities, and that disparity of kind of some of our lowest household income census tracts and some of our most affluent census tracts right next to each other. And what can we do to really start lifting up many of the historic African-American communities just on the west side of the corridor. So just briefly an image to just, for those of you who visually like to see what we're talking about. So I mentioned the corridor itself and then also the Canal District area. So that whole kind of branch off of the red line here that looks like a little hand sticking out there, that is all part of the Canal District off Gwinnett, Stiles, and Louisville. And we have also applied some of this grant work into part of the Gwinnett Street project and others, which Keith will talk about in just a moment. So as I mentioned before, we are really trying to make sure that we're keeping our eye on building a program, not just going through one grant. We want to build a relationship with EPA that is based on integrity and following the intention of the program, the Brownfield program, and really using a lot of the different resources that they have. So that includes, this is kind of a highlight of a potential way forward that we can see with some of the grants that Keith highlighted earlier. The cleanup grant, that's up to $500,000. Assessment grants, again, that's similar to what we've already got, but we're thinking about other potential areas of Savannah that might need and have probably the use for a really targeted effort to identify and assess properties for Brownfield status. There are job training, workforce training grants associated with this. And as you all saw from Daoud at Harambe House early in the call, Harambe House is a fundamental partner of this project and of the work. And so part of the plan, what we are hoping next year as this grant cycles through again from EPA, is that we are applying for that workforce job training grant that assists with training around hazardous mitigation, around construction, around safety on construction sites, all those different things to help some of our unemployed and underemployed folks who are in the community get certifications in jobs that will help move them up the economic ladder as well. There's also a revolving loan fund that EPA offers up to $1 million that we could then, an entity could apply for, receive, and then dole out for small kind of sub-grants to help with redevelopment efforts. So this is not a short-term project. I think all of me said that before as well. This is a program we're trying to build with kind of larger family grants EPA offers, as well as the Georgia State Environmental Protection Division and their Brownfield office, which are two separate pieces. but they can complement each other very well. So yeah, honestly, we are looking at a 5 to 10 year strategy. This isn't something that grows quickly, and I think gaining some we need to identify and assess potentially contaminated properties to make sure we either identify if they have an issue we need to address, or perhaps in fact they don't, and can get that stigma off of that property and start moving towards more productive use. How do we think about enhancing our community engagement with all of this work? We have established a Brownfield advisory board made up of community residents. You all have heard us speak about that in previous meetings, and we have taken many of you and your information on that. I do want to take a moment to just recognize that I think there are many of the Brownfield advisory board members on the call. So just a shout out to all of you for being here, for supporting this, for knowing that this is not always going to be easy conversation or easy work, but that you have all stepped up to understand the importance of this and how we help really do this in a racially and socially equitable way with redevelopment. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment and just open it up to see if there are any questions. He's going to move into another section on kind of what we have done through this grant so far, but open up the floor for any questions.
Hi, Christina here. I did have a question specifically about Azalea Trailer Park, and if this is a site that has been studied in the project yet.
I can tell you it is not a project that has been studied in the project yet, and actually part of the purpose of this community meeting is to get ideas about other pieces of property that we should consider looking at for this grant. So yeah, I will be downloading all of the chat as well, so I'll keep this information and make sure that we really look at it and see if it can apply into this grant itself or if it might come into a future grant. But yeah, appreciate that question. Keith, do you have anything you want to add to that or no?
No, I think, and I only heard part of that. I think lady asked if we could look at a trailer park site. Was that it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, because things are kind of cutting out a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess depending upon, the current status and so on, it might be an option that we can look at.
Yes. What steps would need to be taken to have Azalea be a part of the project?
So essentially, we have a site.
Well, one thing you could do is, I'm sorry, I was going to say.
Go ahead, Keith.
No, I was going to say, we do have a site nomination form, which we can get to you. And then if you'd like to fill it out with the specifics, we can get that in front of the advisory board and take a look at the location, ownership, and so on. And then, get back to you on whether or not it can be included.
This is a very urgent situation. We have many residents of that trailer park have flooding under their homes. This is affecting their plumbing, so people aren't able to flush their toilets. It's affecting their drinking water, so it makes the water smell. And they're also just constantly having their lawns flooded. Their kids play there. I do also rescue cats in this area, feral cats. And the cats that we're rescuing are coming back testing positive for COVID. And these cats are wild, so they don't let people pet them. So the fact that these cats are coming back with COVID means that they're drinking the water and likely getting COVID from the water. So this is a major issue at Azalea.
One issue is it could be a code violation with the city. And because if it is an occupied site, it may not be eligible for this program, but I would say code enforcement would probably be the folks to talk to. I mean, Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, what I would suggest is if you would please, you can do it privately, just send me your contact information and I can reach out to you directly. These funds, no, Edward, to your question, they don't address cleaning COVID out of the ground. And in fact, I don't even know if that is a statement that actually exists. That's not my area of expertise. But what I would say is, ma'am, if you would just make sure that I've got your contact information, I would be happy to follow up with you tomorrow with potential resources that might help you kind of get to the bottom of that, because it definitely sounds like an intense situation.
And then also, just besides the COVID possibly contaminating the water, there's just the issue of the septic tanks that I need a little more help getting information on. We know that the city is aware of the situation, but it looks like not much has been done. So we would like assistance with that as well.
Sure. Yeah, please just send me your email in the chat privately, and I will respond back to you either tonight or first thing in the morning, and we can have a phone conversation even tomorrow and go through it.
Thank you. And we do also have a resident of that community on this call as well, if you needed to hear more specifics from them.
Okay.
Yeah. And Nick, there's a number of notes regarding your audio still. I mean, can you hear me okay?
You're breaking up for me a little bit as well. I guess let me put that question out there. Can people still hear me clearly?
You're good on my end.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, so Keith, I would like to have you come back and just talk a little bit about the slides.
Yeah, so I can pick up and just quickly cover the tasks. There are some basic tasks associated with the project, and one thing I've done from the last meeting is kind of cut down the text on these slides. So hopefully it'll be a little more concise. So the first one is programmatic management and reporting. A whole series of financial accounting forms, monthly status reports, quarterly reports, and coordination with EPA and EPD along the way. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is because the goal is to make all of this work is done seamlessly, because when it comes time to apply for more funds, it's one of the first things the agency looks at. So, you know, we take pride in working with our clients in the city, make sure that there are no questions when it comes time to reviewing grant history, so that you know, the additional come into the community. Next slide. Community engagement and involvement is, like I said before, is key. As Nick mentioned, we have developed a community advisory board. At the second meeting of that group yesterday, we got some really great input, and we'll cover some of that later. Ideally, hold 1 to 2 meetings like this a year, and you know, that's moving forward for, you know, like Nick said, potentially the next decade, because the goal is to not just with this grant, it's to kind of build on it and move forward. Well, okay. And they really host meetings with specific applicants in the community who have sites that the community is interested in turning around, but folks are oftentimes not interested in getting access to their sites because they're afraid of what they might find. Well, one of the things that we can also do is provide consulting services under this grant to help folks into the various regulatory programs that might apply to them if there is contamination. And you know, one of the great things about, you know, being an EPA grantee is that EPD is on board with the general progress of the program, of the sites we're assessing and so on, and available as a resource too. As I mentioned, Nick and Adam are online with the agency now. The graphic to the right just kind of shows that community involvement's on top, and really it's a cycle that shows how with community involvement, sites are assessed, brownfields are redeveloped, funding is leveraged from multiple sources and so on. So just the way it kind of vision the process. Okay, let's go to task 3. Do we go back one maybe or not? Maybe we missed one. No. Okay. Well, we can. Oh yeah, I understand why this is here now. Well, this is just some general notes that we had from the last meeting. And it's funny, right now, I think we have roughly 21 or so folks on board, and we had exactly 21 attendees last time. I'm not sure that everybody's the same, but for those of you who attended over the course of the last couple meetings, it's great to have you back. Last time, 7 attendees expressed interest in joining the advisory board, and I think about half of those have attended meetings. So if you're interested in joining the advisory board, let Nick know through messaging or a private email, because we're always looking for new and innovative input. One attendee inquired as to the benefits of the George Brownfield program, and we'll be covering that later on in the presentation. And another attendee asked if a site could be assessed outside the target area. And the answer to that is yes. Basically, if you've got a site anywhere in the city, once the city gets a grant, it's feasible to assess the property, outside the target area for the application. However, it's got to go through the advisory board, and true demonstrated need must be established. So, and it may be that if there aren't funds to address it under this current grant, we can build it right into the next application. Okay, next slide. Just quickly, under this task, we've done a general site inventory. We have funding to do up to 10 phase 1 ESAs, a generic quality assurance project plan, which, not to bore you with the details there, but quality assurance project plan is essentially the Bible for the project. It basically says how samples are going to be addressed, how the quality is going to be ensured, and so on. And that document is really the basis for the project moving forward. The goal is to conduct roughly 4 phase 2 environmental assessments during the course of the project, and those can vary in scope depending upon what the findings of the phase 1 are. To date, we've done phase 2 activities along Gwinnett. We've done a project on MLK, and we've done some asbestos surveys both on MLK and Gwinnett. So we made some progress. Just to give you an idea, there's roughly 50% of the funds associated with the grant are remaining, and there's just a little over a year left. So our goal is to leverage those funds to really determine what the status of some key properties are and move the program forward. Next. Perfect. Task 4 is really cleanup and development planning. There are funds there to do analysis of brownfield cleanup plans, which are a very complicated way of saying a cleanup plan for a specific site. The reason it's called an analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives plan is that we look at multiple alternatives, vet those with respect to implementability, cost, etc., and kind of come up with a preferred alternative. And there's funding to do roughly 4 of those. We can also do some concept level reuse planning, which we've begun to do in some instances, and are looking forward to doing more of that. So those are the 4 key components of the project: the programmatic, community engagement, assessment, and planning. Those are the bones of the assessment program. And like I said, we've made some good gains. There's some work still done, and we hope to do that over the course of the next, few months, really, or year. And with your input, I'm sure we can, identify some key sites and move. Next. Work completed today. Kind of already addressed some of this, but generic quality assurance project plan, kickoff meetings. We've had 2 other public meetings to date, one in June, one in October. Done some phase 1s, asbestos and lead surveys of the 1204 West Net property. We've also done some work at 1505 Martin Luther King. And once again, the goal is to identify more sites and conduct an appropriate level of planning. So next slide. Georgia's Brownfield program, and this is just a quick summary of contacts and opportunities and benefits. So with that, Nick, if you could address the slide. So the Brownfield coordinator for the state is Shannon Ridley. I don't think Shannon's online today. I know she's been very busy as of late. One of the great things about Georgia is there's a lot of redevelopment activity that's still ongoing even during the pandemic, and a lot of folks really statewide are taking advantage of the program, which has generated a lot of work for folks like Nikki, who is here locally, works out of Richmond Hill, and would be a resource to for local projects on a kind of on a as needed basis. There are a number of different benefits, but I think the bullets to the right kind of summarize the majority of them. There's a limitation of liability that's associated with the program. Basically, you apply to the program before you purchase the site if you know there's contamination there. Carry out whatever cleanup program that's negotiated or approved by the department, and then you get a limitation of liability letter, which is really an insurance policy for when you go to sell the property. You could look at it that way. There are Brownfields tax credits for private entities who purchase and develop sites, and a lot of times folks think of those tax credits as kind of the carrot at the end of the stick for developers because there is some financial gain. And then you get an exemption for the need to address dissolved phase groundwater contamination. What I mean there is if you've got, benzene or toluene or some type of solvent in your groundwater, but there's no free phase contamination present, because you didn't cause it, because you're essentially an innocenter, there's an exemption to address that. Now the agency might go after whoever caused it, but that's kind of another issue. And qualified participants are not responsible for addressing contamination that may be off-site from whatever caused the contamination on your property. And of course, there are intricacies associated with the program and benefits, but those are kind of the key benefits. And maybe at the end, either Adam or Nikki can kind of chime in and cover anything that I missed, because although I work with the program every day, I always tend to leave more things out. With that, if you could advance the slides. Really, community input and the discussion, like Nick said, is really why we're here. So, Nick, if you want to kind of take this and we can all kind of go back and forth, address, come up for questions, and really get to the heart of the matter.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith. And I think, Daoud, if you wanted to unmute and be a part of this as well, just helping facilitate the discussion, that would be helpful. We've got listed here what we would like to cover in the next little bit of the conversation. As we mentioned before, a lot of what we want here is give you a little bit of education at the outset and kind of status of where we are, but then also really hear from you. And that's what this opportunity is for. Any general questions you might still have. We are always looking for additional sites to consider. There are a lot of kind of steps we have to go through to see what sites are appropriate, as well as, EPA has to give the final authorization for us to kind of move forward with assessment of certain sites. But also thinking about the community reuse and development needs. And, we've talked a lot about that in the past, but, certainly if folks have other ideas about what that might be, or specific ideas about what they would like to see in certain locations, we're here to hear that as well, and record that and make sure that we're keeping that in consideration as we go forward. And as Heath mentioned earlier, this is also an invitation. If you are interested in being able to be we're looking for committed members who can actually participate. These aren't going to be advisory board member meetings that are every week, every month, even all the time, but we are kind of stepping up right now. And we are looking for folks who have the time and the ability to commit maybe an hour a month to that meeting and thinking about walking through this discussion with us in the planning process for how we develop this program. So with that, I'm going to stop and open it up to the group.
Nick, I had a question. This is Alex Muir. I work with 100 Miles, a local nonprofit.
Yeah.
You talked about making sure that the sites that are redeveloped, first of all, you mentioned seeing it through the whole way. So making sure it's not just cleaned up, but actually making sure there's something viable and helpful for the community that's put in that space, which I think is so important. But you talked about making sure that property taxes or just the property value increase doesn't put out local residents. And I was curious if you've seen special tax districts employed, and Keith, you may know examples of this too, just from your work with other groups or other communities. Are there special tax districts that could be put in place to keep that from happening? Or what are some of the strategies that could help ensure that residents aren't displaced once those other local properties are developed and their property values increase?
Yeah, and that is a good question. I think,
and if you know the answer to that, then the county or the city should give you a raise and you should be promoted to whatever is, I mean, that's a huge question. So,
well, you know what, and I don't have a good answer to it, so that option is out. But I would say, you know, we have already been having a lot of conversation, not just in this Brownfield program, but internally at the city around all sorts of different options for how we can really promote people staying in place where they live as the community around them and as parts of the community start to redevelop with better amenities that we want the residents who are already living there to enjoy, right? And we want the redevelopment to be directed by and large by the residents who already live there. And so I think there are a number of strategies, many of which I'm not strong in the economic development frame the way our economic development director is here at the city, Manny Dominguez, but he's also a partner in this project work with us. And so we're always having conversations about what are those financial incentives, what are those policies that we may need to consider, what are other communities doing to help in this kind of, you know, the very broad term of it is gentrification mitigation, but I mean, that's so, what we are talking about, what I see it as is displacement of businesses and residents who have already been in the community, who are part of the community, that want to stay in the community and enjoy the benefits of the redevelopment itself and be a part of the redevelopment itself. And so that is kind of how we talk about it. But yes, you're right, there are a lot of pieces there that are much broader than just this one grant that we need to continue to look at and think about how we support that through policy.
So one idea I just would like to talk to you guys further about, well, because my big concern too with this area specifically is that you're going to have pressure from the Canal District increasing property values and then improving those properties along the MLK corridor. It's kind of going to be improving property values along that whole area, which could cause some of that gentrification problem. So I'm curious if there is a way to work with planning and zoning and economic development and then this group to determine which of these properties are going to be restored or, you know, cleaned up and remarketed, and ensure that the zoning of those properties is not going to be detrimental. So if it's zoning for, a high density kind of condo situation, making sure that the zoning on that property has to be affordable housing. And I think there could be ways to do that. So maybe we can talk more about that, but that's just kind of off the cuff.
Yeah, and I will say very generally, and that's from the Brownfield Advisory Group members as well as these meetings that we've had over the last few years, the common themes of what folks want to see as the redevelopment are actually pretty intuitive, and you hear them everywhere, but it is certainly on this side of town, it's access to healthy food. It's access to safe places to recreate and be outside. It's access to better mass transit. It's affordable housing. It's all of those different things. So I think generally speaking, that's the lens through which we're thinking about much of the redevelopment opportunities.
So when you guys pick these properties, are you considering their current zoning or considering what they could be rezoned for as part of that process for selecting them?
That will be, I would say we have not done a huge amount of that because most of those along the corridor itself are already zoned a certain way that we haven't talked about. Is there space to change that necessarily or ensure that that zoning doesn't change? But I definitely think that's something that we would consider and should consider as we bring this into a real program. Absolutely. But I wouldn't say we've given a ton of time to really thinking through the process of what that is, but I like that.
Well, it's just one element. I know you've got a lot going on, so 100 Miles would love to be involved, especially with that aspect of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Other comments or thoughts or ideas? Criticisms? We're looking for all of it. Something that Alex mentioned, and I can't remember the name of the bill, and I know there are folks on the call who know, but related to the Homestead Act, I believe, and the Georgia state policy for homeowners to lock in their property tax rate. Is there someone that can help me with the name of that specific legislation?
What were you asking again?
The Homesteading Act piece, but specifically for Georgia, the name of that, where homeowners can essentially stop their property taxes from increasing. They lock them in the state of Georgia. I will look that up.
Nick, I'm not familiar with, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Otis. I'm happy to look that up, Nick. Let's talk about that. This is Alex.
All right. I know there's a name for it. I cannot recall it offhand. I apologize. But, you know, that's one way to, I think, assist, is letting folks who are in the community who are homeowners, if they have not already done that, to start locking that in. But additionally, we have to recognize that there is a lot of rental and tenants out in many of these areas. And so how do we address the rental units that are out there as we think about?
Yeah, Nick, I think that I found out a little bit more about the homestead exemption. I think you just need to go downtown and file for homestead exemption.
Right.
But I know that in some of these communities, upwards of like 90% of the houses that could file for homestead exemption just have not. So that may be something good for us to partner with the tax commissioner on, to spread the information about that and get people, you know, filing that homestead exemption before January 1st.
Yeah, and I know that our planning department is also really pushing and working on that as well, because there are a number of homes that have not done it. So yeah, thank you, Edward.
Yeah, it basically just boils down to, you know, marketing and PR around that and just getting the word out grassroots.
Is the homestead exemption, is that only for someone that's 62 or older, or is that going to be for like everyone?
I don't think so, but you know what? I don't want to.
It's for everybody. I with my first property I purchased.
Yeah, and you know what? After this, we're going to be sending out a recording of this, or at least sending you a link to that. And with that email, I will also make sure that I give you the clarity on that point. I just cannot come up with the name right now, and I apologize for that. But that is something that definitely I think every homeowner should know about and utilize. But there are still, like I said, there's a number of homes out there, residential units that are renter occupied. And so I think there's certainly a lot of consideration we'll need to give over time, and not just related to the Brownfield grant, but all sorts of displacement mitigation and challenges with that, is that as we redevelop things, we need to make sure that landlords, for instance, are not incentivized to just raise the rents to where they price folks out of the neighborhood either. So, I mean, those are complex issues that I'm only scratching the surface of.
Hey, Nick, Carol had a question in the chat if you want to take a look at that.
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, Carol. So what are the next steps for the subsequent grant submission? And do you expect the next grants to also focus on this corridor or to expand? So very good question. Yes, we currently are, through EPA, we have to spend down a certain amount of our grant that we currently have before we can apply to another of similar type. And so next year, we are intending to apply for another community-wide assessment grant. Right now, what we are considering is, and this is also open for conversation, I think there's one other area that definitely rises to the top in terms of a targeted space and a targeted geographic area that really makes a lot of sense to just focus funding in that area, and that's the kind of Habersham Waters corridor. So that would go from Victory Drive north up to, I don't know, Gwinnett Street, East Gwinnett, and then Habersham to Waters. That's a consideration. That's not necessarily the end-all be-all of what we're going to do, but that's kind of been rising to the top as we've talked through with residents and with the Brownfield Advisory Board. But that is not at all set in stone. Additionally, so that'll be next year that we hope to apply for that. Additionally, looking at the workforce training grants, if we can find properties that are also, able to be cleaned up and get the cleanup funding lined up with an entity that's ready to clean it up and go for that grant, we will assist with that. And certainly on the redevelopment side, I don't know that we will be pursuing the revolving loan fund as soon as next year. That's still pretty iffy, but I think certainly you can look at us focusing on the workforce training grant as well as another community-wide assessment grant, and hopefully along the way helping facilitate some cleanup grants.
Yeah, and Nick, this is Keith. One other point to make regarding the next round of grants would be we can kind of, and I apologize if you may have said this, but you're cutting out again. And one of the things to do would be to focus on refining the story for the next assessment grant as part of the Brownfield Advisory Group. And at that point we can kind of determine what makes most sense and where the priorities are. So just another point. And then I don't know if you said this either, but one of the things that prevented us from submitting this year was that you have to draw down 70% of the grant funds, and we're just shy by $30,000 or $40,000 to be in a place to do that. So we thought it would take the rest of the year to fine-tune what we want to apply for next year. And we're here to help the city and work with everybody to come up with the best approach. Okay.
Tyran, I see your question in the chat too about how will this grant address affordable living in these areas? So I would say the grant specifically, this grant does not directly address that, but I do think we need to be thinking about, to Alex's point, policies that we might want to overlay or put in place that can assist with promoting affordable housing. As part of the redevelopment, though, the Brownfield Advisory Board and residents that we've talked to over the last few years have all been very supportive and interested and requesting, like, let's try and recognize the need we have for affordable housing in this corridor and start bringing that to bear in the redevelopment. So recognizing that this first grant is all about identifying and assessing a property or its characteristics. We're building something much bigger over time. And so future grants might more directly be able to assist with that in some of the redevelopment if we got one of the revolving loan funds, but also strategically thinking about which properties along the corridor might make the most sense for that work. I would also say we're not, the plan here is not to just take a whole block and let's just focus on that whole area and redevelop that. I think that actually right now would be probably the wrong direction to go. Our approach has been, let's find properties that aren't necessarily directly connected, that are just planting little seeds of, okay, this property is starting to come back, get cleaned up, think about the redevelopment potential. But I think if we're talking about affordable housing and really having a large amount of that along the corridor or adjacent to the corridor, then we need to be having some serious conversations with a lot of other departments and residents about where that would best be appropriate to be located. Dawood, I wanted to recognize you again and bring you into the conversation if you have anything from Harambe House's perspective that you'd like to bring into the conversation.
Well, not really over and above the discussion so far. I do want to thank you and Keith, because I think the recap that you presented here was concise and relatively clear. On the point that you just made concerning workforce development, that is an area that Harambe House has several activities, and we're looking at working with this group to develop and go ahead and make that application when we're at that point. We wish to really engage the community and outreach to the neighborhoods in the area about what is going on, and to pull in more feedback. And I'm really happy with the discussion that was generated here. I had a discussion with Dr. McLean after the meeting yesterday. She had a conflict, which is why she's not on this call. And earlier in the presentation, Keith talked about the fact that this particular community meeting, we're looking at having them once or twice a year. We're thinking we want to have another community outreach a meeting like this, maybe early in 2021, and between now and then, really kind of spread the word about what is going on, and re-energize the involvement of the people living along the MLK corridor.
Yeah, and I would also add, Harambe House, one of the roles that Dawood is really assisting the city with, and Dr. McLean is assisting the city with, is helping identify and property owners, as well as just buildings or properties along the corridor that we might want to explore further, and how to find connections with some of the owners. That's not always as easy as you might think. And so that's something that Harambe House is also assisting with as we go through. I do want to reiterate, part of the feedback and the input we want from you is, if you know of folks who have property along the corridor who may or may not be interested in at least having a discussion about their property along this project, please feel free to send that our way. We would love to talk with folks and just give them the background of this program and see if that seems like something that fits for them. If it does, wonderful. If it doesn't, no harm, no foul there either. We are just trying to really get the word out and let folks know what we can offer, how we could assist, and if that's something that fits with their future desires for the property, great. If it doesn't, again, that's not a big deal. So it's not a pressure situation. It's really just, if you know of folks, or if you know of properties that you want us to specifically look at, like one was mentioned earlier on Ogeechee Road, then we will certainly take all of that in and welcome it.
Christina here. I do have a little note of input. I would also recommend to keep in mind that the people in these communities with these issues, English is not always their first language. So for example, at Azalea, the city has come out there, but they don't typically have someone who speaks Spanish. So they either just don't try to have a conversation with these people, or just well, there's also been cases of them assuming that the individual doesn't speak English, but also it would just be helpful to have someone who speaks Spanish. And we do also have people from Asian communities, Asian countries that don't have English as a first language. So just consider possibly getting a resource to help reach out to those people.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. And I'm definitely aware of that, but I think for next time we could definitely consider that for the next meeting, as well as the flyers that go out. Yeah, thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, anyone else? I know we're kind of reaching the time, a little over 7 o'clock. Really, the intention was to be done around 7, about where we are. And if anyone would like to stay on, please feel free. I will kind of move on to our contact information here. Always certainly feel free to reach out to any of the 3 of us or all of us. And you can expect to receive at least a link to this recording so that you can go back and check it out further if you'd like, or share it with others. We'll have that to you all soon. What I would ask, though, is if you did not receive this invite for this webinar directly from me, please take a moment, if you haven't already, to either in the private chat or publicly, if you don't mind, private or otherwise, just send me your contact information so I can email that to you. And so we'll stick around here for a little bit, but that concludes our formal presentation. Please continue to stay on and ask any other questions you want, or have a great rest of your evening. I apologize for some of the technical issues. We lost our internet right before that from the storm, and so I don't know if that had a part to play or not, but hopefully it will be better next time.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody.